Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I'm so happy to see your face. I'm so happy to see anyone's face these days. so,
For
um,
sure.
so where are you joining us from today?
So I am currently in central San Benito County. I'm about 20 minutes south of Hollister, um, just kind of on the edge of the Gavilan Mountains. And so I'll actually pull up a picture for you. Let me see if I can do this without making a huge mess of our situation here. uh, so yeah, I'll show you a picture of where I am. Go. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry. Oh gosh, I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to use these machines. So yeah, so this is a view from my from the front of our house looking across. We just live in like a little valley, and yeah, this was taken a couple of weeks ago on a rainy day.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so that's where I am.
It seems very inspirational, a great setting to be stuck in.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, we definitely have more non-human neighbors than human neighbors, which I really and especially right now, it makes it really easy to be socially isolated.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
that's great. Can you tell us a little bit about your art setup, your home studio where you are? Have you been working throughout this?
I have, yeah. So I'm sitting in my studio right now. I'm kind of have a corner view here because the rest of my studio is totally overrun by art pieces that I was expecting to have hanging in the museum, for example.
Oh,
Um, so I have a dedicated room in our house that is mostly my studio. I also share it with an insect cabinet that is full of my partner's entomology collection, which is kind of cool. And so yeah, I just have kind of I use a door blank, like a door that has no handle or hinges as my drawing table.
oh, nice.
It's a nice big size. It also means that it gets kind of overrun by other things, but yeah, so I have kind of a nice dedicated art space in our house, which is really super awesome. Really, I've worked in all kinds of situations. This one is definitely one of the best.
How are you? So I guess I know of you as this really important part of our community. I run into you around town at art markets and at other events, and I've had the privilege of being able to work with you and hang out with you at the museum. So I'm curious how you are staying connected with your very many communities during this time. How's that going for you?
Yeah, I've actually kind of there's part of my work which is like me in my studio, so this is has not changed that a whole lot, but I've also connected with a few other local artists. I have a I sent another artist like a packet of, like I sent her some stickers and a coloring book, and she's going to send me some stuff back. So we're kind of like exchanging art, which is really fun. And I love mail. I love snail mail. And so I've gotten more like personal snail mail in the last couple of weeks than I have, especially from people I don't really know. Than I have in a long time. So that's really awesome. And then I'm also doing a collaboration with another artist where like she sent me a blank piece of like a drawing substrate, and I'm going to do some drawing, and then I'm going to send it back, and she's going to work on it. And so, and I think she's doing that with a bunch of other artists. So I'm hoping there'll be yeah, that maybe something will come out of that at the end of this, that we'll all have some kind of collaborative work to show. So that's one of the things I'm doing to kind of stay connected to the art community, because a lot of the folks I see, or kind of connect with, it's through the exhibits or art markets or whatever. And since all of those are kind of on hold, we're finding other ways to do that. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And you're doing this.
And I'm doing this, yeah, which is really exciting. It's really fun. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you too about the mail. I've gotten handwritten letters in the mail, and someone sent me cookies in the mail.
Oh yeah,
It's so great.
yeah, it is great. It's really
Almost makes
sweet.
up for, being disconnected in other ways almost. But
Yeah, yeah.
so I wanted to talk a little bit about your history of being involved with the museum, because it's a long history. And you've been a dear friend and helped us out in a lot of ways, and partnered with us on things. And so I'm curious if you can share your museum story.
Sure. So I went through the science illustration program at UC Santa Cruz. The last year it was at UC Santa Cruz. And the museum had always hosted the graduation exhibition, and that was called Illustrating Nature, right?
Mhm.
Illustrating Nature. Wow.
Right.
And so my first real, I mean, I had been to the museum, of course, I grew up coming to Santa Cruz a lot when I was a kid, and I have, kind of deep family ties here. And so I had been there, but not, I hadn't really engaged in kind of as an adult. And so our graduation show was at the museum. So of course we were there, kind of hanging the show and putting together the other displays and all of that stuff. So that was 2009. And then the program moved to CSUMB, and the show went with it. And so the museum reached out to me and some of the other alumni and the local, the California chapter of the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, and said, hey, we'd like to really continue doing this exhibit. Would you want to do it as, kind of alumni and scientific illustrators? And we said, yeah, sure. And so I've been helping out with that ever since. And at the beginning, in those first few years, the Guild really did a lot of the outreach and the organizing and all that, and the museum kind of hosted us. And the Guild, the California chapter, is kind of on pause, or kind of, just not super active. And so the museum has really kind of taken the lead in helping the show to continue, which is really awesome. And I think we've now been able to include a lot more folks, right? Not just folks who are members of the Guild or alumni of the program, but other people who are really gifted illustrators, or folks who are learning, right? Students who are taking classes like at UCSC at the Norris Center. We've been able to include them in the show the last few years, and that's been it's really awesome to see the show really kind of expand and include a lot more folks. So yeah, so that's kind of how I initially was connected to the museum. And I've also had a solo exhibit a few years ago. And last year the museum, did me this great honor of giving me the Laura Hecox Award. And so that's also been really, it's just really an honor to be recognized in that way. So yeah, we've had a kind of long, ongoing, evolving relationship, and it's just, really exciting for me to be.
And I guess I'll share a little bit about that award that you mentioned, the Laura Hecox Naturalist Award. It's something that the museum's been giving out to one local community member every year for the past couple of years, and we award it to someone in our community who embodies the spirit of our founder, Laura Hecox, and her tenacity and curiosity, and efforts to connect others with nature. And so we were really excited. Last year was our 30th year of showcasing science illustration at the museum, and it seemed like the perfect time to honor Megan with this award, because you so beautifully connect both your extreme talent and ability to convey accuracy and interest in your work, but also for how much you tie it to community science projects that are going out in the community, to research that is going on out in the community, which we'll have hopefully some time to talk about today. But I wanted to go back to the art of nature a little bit, which you were talking about. So this year, the exhibit, we were supposed to launch it not last weekend, but the weekend before, I think. what is time?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And
Yeah, a couple
so
weeks
we
ago, I
weren't
think, yeah.
open, but we have been able to launch it virtually. So I encourage everyone watching to go to the museum's website and look at the virtual exhibit, and you can see Megan's work in there. And so I was wondering if you could share with us, maybe you can pull up an image of the work that you have that was selected for this year's show, and kind of share a little bit about it with us.
Yeah, totally. All right, so we're gonna do the screen share thing again.
Yeah,
Like I'm just gonna act like I know exactly what I'm doing here.
And
All right.
also, I'll just say to people watching, if you have any questions for Megan, please write them in the comments. I'm doing an okay job at looking. So far, it looks like we've got a lot of excitement from Felicia. And I'm too late on idea chainmail, Felicia. Maybe you and I can get that going. Okay, great. Tell us about this.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the piece that's in the show this year. And so the last few years I've been kind of exploring the idea of like food webs and ecological relationships, and kind of how, you know, I think, and I'm really interested in like threatened and endangered species. And so I think a lot of times we think about when we're protecting a creature, an organism, you know, whether it's a plant or an animal or whatever, we think about that individual creature without really kind of recognizing that that creature lives in a context. And so just protecting an individual organism really requires that we take that context into account and really kind of protect the whole system, not just the individual organism. And so so I've done a whole bunch of these pieces that are kind of focused on the way that a particular organism fits in its ecosystem. And so this one is about snowy plovers. That's the bird in the middle, and the dune ecology that they kind of, that is part of their habitat. It's not the only thing they use on the beach, of course, but I, you know, I think the dunes are also kind of a threatened ecosystem, especially in California. Our coastal dunes are really impacted by all kinds of things: development, erosion, you know, climate change, all those things. And so so I wanted to kind of focus on the snowy plover, which is such a you know, a kind of like a lovable little creature. You know, they're these like sweet little birds that live on the beach, and they're super cute, but also kind of describe the other things that share that habitat with them. And so there's a dune beetle, there's the legless lizard, and there's a few kind of subspecies of legless lizard, and the one in this piece is specific to the Monterey Dunes. So that's the black, they're almost totally black, and then their belly is kind of a bright yellow, so you just see a tiny bit of that yellow. The blue butterfly is actually the Smith's blue, which is also a threatened species, and pretty exclusively lives in dunes. And we have a population on the Monterey Bay, so down like in near Marina Seaside area, there are Smith's blues down there, and I think in maybe a few other places in California, but pretty limited. Again, the dune habitat's really, you know, it's been impacted quite a lot. And then the rest of the plants are all dune specific plants. So there's buckwheat, coast buckwheat, which is the host plant for the caterpillars of the Smith's blue. Sand verbena, which is just a beautiful plant. You know, it's just such a pretty, cool plant. And then a lupin, Tidestrom's lupin, that lives in the dunes also. And you know, we have lupins all over the place, but that one is specific to dune habitat. So yeah, and so this is a watercolor and pen and ink. It's probably, I don't remember the size exactly, but they're usually around like, these pieces are usually around like 24, 26 inches square typically. So yeah, that's this piece.
Yeah, I really love stumbling upon dune plants on the beach. Sometimes because sometimes they are sort of like singular, like they're not really necessarily surrounded by a bunch of other plant life, and so you're just like, oh my gosh, this miraculous plant, like how are you surviving here? But that's great. We have the museum's located across from Seabright Beach, and there's habitat restoration that's going on there, and snowy plovers nest there, and the verbena is some of my favorites. This is a lovely piece. We're really happy to have it in the show. And it's really interesting, I think, the way that you do the food webs, where you can do a landscape of all of these things together too, but I feel like I see all of the parts more clearly in this way. And then, like you said, like really showcasing the interaction and how they depend on each other. It's just, it's great. We love it.
Yeah, and I get to do, a lot of fun research. And so, like, for example, the lizard. So when I was this one took me a long time to figure out the layout, because I was like, well, how do I arrange the plants? And I don't want to do it in just like a random way. So I tried to put, like, the lizard often hangs out near the lupin. So I put the lizard near the lupin. The butterflies, of course, use the buckwheat. So I put the butterflies near the buckwheat, so I was trying to kind of make sure that, kind of connect those things a little bit too. But yeah, it can be kind of an interesting process. I spent a lot of time researching and reading and talking to scientists and making sure I get it right. Because of course, if I don't, so someone will tell me. They'll be like, well, what's happening there? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Because if it's not published, how am I supposed to know?
Megan, we do have a question before. I know at some point I do want to get further into the like that science side of what you do, but we do have a question about your kind of technique here from Andrea. She's asking, why do you create circular compositions for your ecosystem pieces?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one of the things that this is where, like, the art part of my practice kind of comes up, because I think people really respond to circular images. I think there's something about circles that I just feel as humans, we just really relate to that and we connect to that. It's a way that we connect to each other, right? And it shows up in nature in all kinds of ways. And I think it kind of reflects the idea of, like, cycles and connection, and that there's no real boundary, right? There's no real border to, like, for example, an ecosystem. And so I like using the circle as a kind of a frame to kind of give me a structure to work in. And I'll actually pull up. So there's, I don't know if you can see me scrolling, but there's a bunch of, I kind of put together some of the way I construct this, like the process. And so at the very beginning, this is how a lot of these pieces start, where there's, I use, this is all done on paper. I do it all by hand. So I use a compass and a protractor. And this is what I start with. I start with a circle, and it gives me kind of a structure for then setting up the composition. And it's kind of a way for me to, like, narrow down, how am I going to arrange these things? How am I going to put them together? How are they going to be kind of positioned in relation to each other? And so, yeah, that's how they start. And then it just helps me kind of, it gives me kind of a frame to start with.
Do you ever, this is probably silly because you're doing it by hand, but, like, do you ever just sort of take one plover and then rotate it and put it below?
I do. Well, yeah. So what I do is I can show you. So this is the inked version of the drawing, but yeah, I basically take I do a bunch of sketches. I figure out the position of the creature and all of that stuff. And then I do a drawing of it on a piece of tracing paper. And then, like, in this one, you'll see it. So I transfer it onto the paper in one time, and then I'll use the same drawing and just flip it and do it again. And so for something like the plover, it's really easy because there's only two. But when I was getting into the plants, then it was like, well, I was basically drawing, like, the flowers, and I did some of the leaves, but then I, kind of mess around with, like, well, where's the stem going to be and all that. So I do some freehand, especially with plants, but yeah, I definitely use the same drawing for the same element.
So thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I guess what I'd like to hear from you next is just about like why science illustration for you? Where did that come from? What do you
Oh,
love?
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've always been interested in, um, drawing animals and stuff. If you can maybe see behind me, there's a black and white drawing my mom saved and framed. Um, and I think on it, it says I was 8 when I did that. And I think, so I've always been really interested in drawing animals. That was the kind of art that was in my house, was like wildlife art, right? So like, paintings of birds. My dad was a bird hunter. And so we had, like art based on duck stamps in our house. And so so I was just always really interested in that. And like that was the first thing I ever learned to draw, was a duck. And I remember the lesson, right? Um, so so I was always interested in that. I pursued art. I took art lessons all growing up. I had the incredible experience, it seems like now, of having art classes in high school, which seems like super wild. But I wanted to, study science as an undergraduate, and I tried, and I got the Girl in Science treatment. This was some time ago. I don't think it's changed all that much, but I think it has changed some. But anyway, yeah, like my advisor wouldn't talk to me, and I was just like, what? So I bailed, and I spent some time doing art stuff. I was connected to an arts community, and I was doing art and music and all kinds of stuff. And then when I went back to school, I kind of still was flailing around a little bit, but I ended up studying art because it was the most challenging for me. I was always a good student. I loved school. I liked studying, but art was hard. It required me to really think differently and use a different set of skills. And I mean, I had this life drawing class, figure drawing class, that I remember I would just cry every day at the end. It was so hard. And it wasn't, the teacher was like intense and she was kind of mean, but it was mostly because it was hard. And I was just like, what am I doing? But it was a good challenge and I loved that. But as I was getting ready to graduate, it was kind of like, well, now what do I do? Like, what do I do with an art degree? And my mom, so I was living in Portland. My mom was living in Santa Cruz, and she sent me an article about science illustration. And of course, I was still in that stage of my life where I was like, oh, that's dumb. I don't want to do that. But she planted a seed, which is, what my mom is really good at doing, and just letting, just like letting it be, and not pressing it too much. So she planted that seed, and that was 2002, and or around there. And it took me a few years, but I applied. I came back to Santa Cruz, and I applied to the program, and it took me a couple tries before I got in. I spent a long time working on my portfolio because I had a traditional undergraduate art experience. There was not a lot of technical drawing. There was not a lot of focus on accuracy. It wasn't about that. And so I really had to learn some of those skills before I think I was ready. But I really loved the ability to come back to science, and to learn and explore the natural world, and also use the drawing skills that I had been, developing my whole life, in order to communicate about the world around us, the particularly non-human world. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there.
Maybe that's a good segue into like how you use it now, because I know that you partner with a lot of different organizations, not only as like for science illustration, but just like in general as a volunteer. And a lot of really cool stuff. Like I want to go do all the things that you do. But so maybe could you share with us some of the organizations that you partner with and what that experience is like? And if you have
totally. Yeah, I've done all kinds of stuff. One of the things that I have done, I mean, so as part of my degree, I did an internship at Cornell at the Lab of Ornithology, which was totally a dream. It was like my dream job, and it was so fantastic. So I've done illustration work for Cornell. And, you know, kind of over the years, they, you know, sometimes will say, hey, you know, we have this project, you know, would you be interested in doing it, and all that kind of things. And so that's been kind of a, you know, an awesome ongoing relationship. I've done illustration work for the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory, and I'll pull up, I volunteer out at Pinnacles National Park, so that's another kind of ongoing source of inspiration and excitement and connection. And I mainly do wildlife stuff there. So I right now we're in the middle of raptor breeding season, and so I'm doing nest monitoring for the raptors that nest at Pinnacles. And they occasionally will, you know, same thing, say, hey, we've got this project, we need some illustrations, can you help us out? So I'll pull up what I have done for them. There we go. Okay, so this piece is, so I did a series of illustrations. This is for the Condor program, comparing condors to 3 other species that they are commonly kind of mistaken for, right? So at the top of this wingspan drawing there are 2 condors, an adult and a juvenile, and then 2 golden eagles, same thing, adult and then juvenile, and then a turkey vulture, and then a raven. And so we did this. So I did this series where we compared the wingspans, we compared their flight shape, right? What they look like when they're flying, how a condor holds its wings versus how other birds hold their wings. And then we did these head comparisons. So this is an adult condor on the top and a juvenile, and then golden eagle, raven, and then adult turkey vulture and juvenile turkey vulture. And this is actually my favorite because I used a museum specimen for this drawing. I was trying to figure out, so we want to do this foot comparison because people are often really freaked out, especially kids are freaked out about condors because they're so big, and they think like, oh my God, they're going to come and they're going to take me away. And so this is a great illustration about, this is what the feet of these creatures look like. And a condor has big feet, really big feet, but they're kind of like a chicken, right? They're kind of like giant chicken feet. They're not super strong. They don't have any reason to have strong feet. They don't have to grasp anything and pick it up off the ground. They eat things that are already dead. So that's a condor foot on the top. But the golden eagle, that was part of the, you know, part of the group of species that I was illustrating. And like, I don't know what a golden eagle foot looks like. And, you know, you look up, do a Google search, golden eagle. Do you see their feet? No, not well. And so I, you know, contacted the museum and said, you guys have a golden eagle, right? Can I come look at it? And so I went to the museum one day and sat on the floor with the golden eagle, you know, in the case, and got to look at its feet. And I had no idea. I had no idea that that back talon was the biggest one. It's huge. And it's scary. I was like, whoa. But so it was such an awesome, that was such an awesome like way to connect to the museum. I mean, that's another thing that I really appreciate about my relationship with the museum, is that I can do that. So yeah, so this is another.
I'll just say too, like anyone can do that too. Anyone can come into the museum when we're open.
Right, not today. Yeah.
Yeah, in the future time, we welcome you to come do this and sit and draw. We have people do that all the time. And then also we have specimens that we rent out to classrooms or to, you know, community members who would benefit from them. We have certain specimens that are like really well protected that can be sent out. And so, yeah, just to share that like this resource is available to anyone who would like it.
Yeah, and I've used the museum. So one of the other things I do is I teach classes, or not right now, but typically I've started teaching classes through Cabrillo Extension, and I taught a class on illustrating birds earlier in the spring, and I was able to borrow a whole bunch of specimens from the museum to take so that my students could look at, you know, feet and bills and, you know, all kinds of wings. We looked at all kinds of wings. And I had specimens that I could, have students be able to really take a close look at. And that was such an awesome way also to kind of connect people to the museum and all of the resources there. So yeah, so I've taught classes through Cabrillo. I've taught classes at Filoli, up the Filoli Center, which is up on the peninsula. I have a list. Hold on. I know I'm forgetting things.
And also, I know that one of the things that you do, because I think it sounds so cool, and this actually relates to a question that we got from Jeannie. Jeannie's asking, do you draw bats? Bat burritos.
Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I will always preface this with this. So a couple of years ago, I took a class through San Francisco State. They have a field campus up near Yuba Pass, and it was a class about conservation and ecology of California bats. And in order to take that class in order to handle bats in that class, of course, I have a rabies vaccine. So do not try this at home unless you are vaccinated for rabies. And even then, you really need to have like a permit and stuff to do all this. But so I took that class, and then because Pinnacles, there are bats at Pinnacles. We have an endangered species of bat, the Townsend's big-eared bat, lives at Pinnacles, but there's also a bunch of other bats, and there's a lot of interest, particularly with white nose syndrome, kind of coming across the country, and now in California. We're kind of in a rush to figure out really what our bats do, because their behavior in California is very different than it is in other parts of the country. And so we're trying to figure all that out. So there's a lot of interest in doing bat research. So we have kind of partnerships with the US Geological Survey and other researchers who come down to Pinnacles. We put up mist nets at night and catch bats, and sometimes just take measurements. We kind of do a health check, that kind of thing. And then
you have any pictures from this?
Oh gosh, not on my computer.
That's okay. I just thought
I didn't think of that. Gee, asking me questions about bats. It's good. And so anyway, and then there's also a radio tagging program, which is that's how we figure out where they're roosting. Are they roosting with other bats? Do they, where do they hang out during the day, and all of that kind of thing. So I haven't done a ton of bat illustrations. It's really hard to get good reference for bats because they're hard to photograph. When we're handling them, we're doing it quickly. And often, yes, they are wrapped up in what we call bat burrito. So what that is one of the things we're doing when we're, catching bats and handling them is we're taking measurements to, kind of assess, partially as a data point, but also to assess health and that kind of thing. And so we weigh them, and there are a couple ways to do that, but one way to do it with small bats is you take a piece of fabric and you kind of like roll them up into a little, like you like put them, like you swaddle a baby, right? Like if you swaddle a baby, they just like chill out. So the same thing with a bat. The bat is super not happy about being handled, but if you roll it up into a little burrito, then it kind of calms down. You can put it on the scale, and it'll sit still for long enough that you can get a weight measurement, and then you can free it from its burrito and put it back in the bag, or put it, let it go.
And so some of your volunteer work is specifically for art, but others are, it's for a different site.
Yeah, wildlife. Yeah. And so I've been doing bat work at Pinnacles. We're doing kind of regular monitoring and radio tracking. And then also I've been helping out a graduate student at CSUMB. She's doing a study. Her graduate kind of work is about foraging behavior of two different bat species that are kind of closely related, and how like different sorts of habitats, if they behave differently in different sorts of habitats. So she's looking at like rural, agricultural, suburban, and urban foraging behavior. So yeah, and there's just not very many people who have the skills and the ability to, handle bats. And so I'm just putting my skills to good use, and it's really fun and it's super interesting. And yeah, I'm learning a lot, and it's also kind of a source of inspiration for me. So I haven't included a bat in a piece yet, not one of these big kind of ecosystem pieces yet, but I'm working on it. It's hard because there's not a lot of research, or not a lot of published research on the kind of role of bats in ecosystems. So especially in California. So,
well, that kind of reminds me too of one of your projects that I know that you did as a residency program with Elkhorn Slough, right? Where that was actually taking research that was being done actively there, and then using that and you have, I know, a really wonderful piece. I have a story to share where you're pulling it up. We in our gift shop at the museum feature a lot of Megan's work. So again, once we open back up, come by and get all the stickers and all of the tote bags and oh my gosh, they're so great. And one of them, I was looking at it and there were these otters on it, and I was looking through and I was trying to identify what other things I could find. And I had read an article about this study and I knew it. So I'll let you tell the story, but I had this moment of like,
I already know. Yeah.
It was so special for me to feel, like I understood it in that way. But if you could share it, that would be great.
Yeah, totally. All right. All right. So this piece, so this is, so I did an artist in residence in the spring of 2018. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. And I stayed at Elkhorn Slough. There's a research station there, and I was able to stay in the research station. There's like a little apartment that they, offer to artists and researchers and stuff. And so I was there. I get to be there all the time for like a week. And I didn't really have any agenda, right? I was like, I don't know what I'm going to learn. But I just got to explore, and I also got to connect with the researchers, which is really exciting. And so one of the things that I learned pretty quickly is that there was a PhD student who had been doing research in the slough about the role of sea otters. And, because we kind of knew, like this piece, we kind of know there's really been a long history of research done about what the role of sea otters is in the health of kelp forests, right? They eat the things that eat the kelp. And so if they're there, they kind of keep those creatures under control. The kelp is healthy. And then it's it's a habitat for all kinds of other creatures. So that's that. But in the slough, there was just, otters hadn't been there for a long time. And so as the otter population has grown and kind of rebounded especially in Monterey Bay, they started being in the slough more, and people started noticing that like, oh, the eelgrass is coming back. That's interesting. Like, what's up with that? And it turns out that the otters eat these crabs are one of their very favorite things to eat. They eat crabs, and the crabs prey on these little green sea slugs that are like on the outside of the otters there in this piece. So the otters eat the crabs. That allows the sea slug population to be happy. The slugs eat the algae off the grass, the eelgrass. And that allows the eelgrass to be healthy. And then the eelgrass beds are, habitat for all kinds of things, including, of course, the slugs, but also they are nursery habitat for bat rays and all kinds of fish, including these Dover soles. So you take the otter out of that picture, out of that equation, and the whole thing kind of falls apart and is out of balance. And this is one of those things that like when there's kind of efforts to protect otters and help their population, no one had any idea that it would affect this entire ecosystem in the slough. So yeah, and I did not expect to get excited about otters at all. So I'm like, yeah, otters, like, oh God, everybody loves otters. but it was really cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool story. And I got to hang out with otter researchers. So I was like, well, you know, you just never know in situations like that. So yeah, so that's another organization that I've, you know, kind of partnered with, which is the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, and the Elkhorn Slough, which is just a really incredible place. And I just feel like, wow, it's just amazing that we have all these really cool kind of ecosystems right, you know, in our backyard.
That kind of leads me to another question that I have for you, which is just in general, like, what is your favorite natural setting to be in? Like, where do you most want to find yourself?
That is you know, that's a hard question for me to answer because I think it's seasonal, I think a lot of times for me, but I think the kind of generic answer, and this is something I learned about myself when I was living in Ithaca when I was at Cornell, which is that I like to be someplace that I can see a long way. I was reading a lot of Wallace Stegner at the time, which seemed really unfair because he's so much about being in the West, but I grew up in the West and this is my home. And so I was like, yeah, I want to be places where I can see a long way.
Well, right? Pull up your home picture again.
Yeah, totally. Where'd it go? Oh, did I close it?
That's okay, but yeah, that's
sorry, that's not what I meant to do. Anyway, like, yeah.
Where you want to be then.
But pretty much anywhere I can see a long distance. I mean, I love the desert for that reason. I don't want to be there when it's hot, but I love the desert, especially like in the early spring and in the winter. I spend a lot of time up in the high elevation of like the Southern Cascades and the Sierra. And the White Mountains in the summertime. So high mountain valleys are like, wow, my favorite. Just my favorite. But yeah, you know, I don't think I've ever been anywhere outside that I didn't like.
Well, I have another question about preference, and this one comes from Joyce.
Okay.
And Joyce is very enamored with your condors, eagles, and turkey vultures series, and she's wondering what your favorite raptor or vulture is to study, observe, sketch.
Oh, wow, that's hard. That's a hard choice. It's kind of like favorite place outdoors. Like, it's hard. I mean, I will say, you know, it maybe it's not fair because they kind of are in a category of their own, but I really do love condors. I just love them. And I think, you know, the more I learn about them, the more interesting they are. You know, I do sometimes do volunteer work for the Condor program at Pinnacles, and I've had the incredible opportunity to actually put my hands on a condor, which is like,
what?
Yeah, you know, we do not handle birds very often, but when we do, it takes a team to handle that bird. And so yeah, just once, but yeah, it's just.
Can you pull up another image of a condor? And I mean,
yeah, let me see if I can find I'm like, why did I it's so dumb. Anyway, yeah, give me just a sec and I'll get up these where are they? Pinnacles Condor to share. Here we go. So I'll show you the wingspans. Yeah, I mean, this is not maybe the greatest example, but you know, it's a big bird and they're beautiful. They're so they're just really charismatic, and they're curious, and they're social, and they all have different personalities. And you know, and I spend a lot of time at Pinnacles, and there's a very active flock there, and especially in the wintertime, they're around the park a lot. And so I've gotten to see them a lot lately. I mean, not super lately, but in the last few months. And yeah, they're just really neat birds, really interesting. And of course they're like a critically endangered species, which, that's of course they're special in that way. But it's cool to see the way that they are kind of recovering on their own in some ways, you know. There's birds that never come into the park, you know, that we are like, well, they're out there, but we don't really know what they're doing. And that's great, you know. We don't always know. We've had, you know, in the last couple of years, we've had nests that like we just didn't know that there was a bird nesting somewhere outside, you know, out on private property or somewhere else. And it's like, that's awesome. You know, they're doing their thing.
Yeah.
So
I've only seen condors once, and it was at Pinnacles, and boy, was I knocked over. You know, you think you know what you would expect to feel in that, but it really is something else. They're a bird. I have another comment for you from Karen. She took a bird anatomy drawing class with you and was looking forward to taking a butterfly class with you, but like now she can't. And so she's wondering if you have any butterfly drawings to share other than, I know we had those butterflies in your dunes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's see. So let's just dig through my, oh, look
you
here.
also do a butterfly program too, don't you, that you volunteer with?
Well, yeah. So that's so I, in the summertime, so the North American Butterfly Association gathers data from all over the country, you know, the US, Canada, and Mexico on, so there's like an annual count. And so there's various places in the country where people gather, and it's kind of modeled after like a Christmas bird count, which is a 15-mile radius or 15-mile diameter circle, and groups go out and count as all the butterflies they can see in that 24-hour period. And so, you know, the earliest one in California, well, the earliest one in this part of California, I should say, but the earliest one for the summer butterfly counts for NABA is at Pinnacles. And so I start with the Pinnacles count. It's usually the beginning of June or the very last weekend of May. You know, and then there's counts in Monterey and in like down at Big Creek, the Big Creek Reserve, which is a UC reserve, UC Hastings Reserve, which is in Carmel Valley. And then there's a few in the Bay Area, which I normally can't get to because of the, you know, the timing. But then we basically chase spring up in elevation. And so all over California, we go up in the northeast part of the state. And then the last count of the year is always at Yosemite, which is the very end of July, because that's springtime in Yosemite, in the high country of Yosemite.
Do you, off the top of your head, like know if there have been any changes over the course of time that you've been?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've only been doing it, I think this will be my 5th year doing them. And long-term trends are hard to judge. Every year is different, you know. A few years, I think maybe 2 years ago, they had just opened Tioga Pass, which is the eastern entrance to Yosemite, the high elevation part of Yosemite. They had just opened it right before we got there. So because there was still snow, like a lot of snow, on July 30th. So the butterflies were different that year. And we had to go up super high, you know, but yeah, so it's different every year depending on, you know, all kinds of weather conditions. So it's hard to say. I don't have a good sense because I've only been doing it a few years, but that is part of what that data is for, right? Is to look at long-term trends. And there's, you know, there's years that are like last year, the painted ladies, right? Like everyone in California was like, oh my God, there's painted ladies like everywhere. Like people in LA were like, what are these butterflies? You know, and that's kind of a normal cycle. But it really depends on so many factors. But I think, you know, habitat is definitely part of it. And, you know, of course, there's a lot of news about monarchs, right? And the loss of our monarch populations in California and the West. But we're looking at every species, and so that's a much bigger data set, and I think harder to assess in a short period of time. So
I want to make, so we've got probably like 5 or so more minutes left. So I want to ask a little bit more about your particular style with science illustration, and maybe if you can share a little bit about your like medium that you like to practice in.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I, of course I have to have a kind of a broad skill set, depending on the project. The piece that's up right now, the butterflies, so these butterfly plates are kind of an unusual medium, which is, the surface is called duraline. It's like a frosted mylar kind of filmed, semi-transparent film, and I use gouache on one side of the film, and then I use colored pencil on the other side. So there's like this nice rich depth, right? There's actually 2 layers of medium, of illustration. So that's one way, like a lot of the color work I do, especially for things like this, or I do that way. But also, but like all of the big pieces, like the otters and the plovers and all of those things are pen and ink and watercolor on watercolor paper. So I do, I do all the drawing and everything. I do all the ink work, and then I lay the watercolor over that. Yeah, and I do, I also do a lot of pen and ink work, and like the Condor stuff that I was showing earlier. So all of these are just watercolor. I think maybe there's a little bit of ink in there, but mostly just watercolor. So yeah, lots of different stuff, but I really love, I think watercolor, I didn't expect that watercolor would be the thing I would get really into, because so much of my art background, like my undergraduate degree, I learned oil painting. I didn't know anything about watercolor. They do not teach you watercolor in art school, like at all, at least not where I was. And so I had to learn how to paint all over again. It's a totally different way of painting, but I love watercolor, and I can, it's mobile. I can take it with me. I don't do these huge pieces outside, but
how much of your time do you think you spend working like out in the field, in a sketchbook, in a, with a field journal, versus how much time you spend in your studio? I guess now it's probably a lot of studio time.
Well, yeah. I am drawing, like I do draw, like looking out my window right now, a lot, or sitting out in front of the house or in the back of the house or whatever. But I would say, that's a good question. My work is kind of split into like three segments, and I think I probably spend equal amount of time in all 3. One is sketching, drawing outside, being outside, like just kind of kind of absorbing what I'm seeing, and making sketches and notes and that kind of thing. I spent a lot of time researching, right? So like this piece, the otter piece, like, I was seeing otters, I was seeing the kelp beds, I was seeing the bat rays, but like, I don't know anything about those things. Not a lot, not enough. And so then I spent a lot of time researching and reading and talking to scientists and trying to figure out what's going on. And, did I talk to the right person? And, is that really published yet? And has that been peer reviewed and all that? And then the rest of the time in the studio. And that's a lot of experimenting and drawing. Like you can kind of see over here, like, I was like, what am I going to do here? How am I going to do this? Like, oh, I wonder if I do some pen and ink and then some watercolor, how's that going to work? I was really, I mess around a lot before I get to a finished piece like this. So I would say of those 3 things are probably an equal amount of time, developing even just one piece. But like a piece like this, like these otter things are probably like, so usually these are somewhere between 60 and 80 hours of work, at least, sometimes more.
Like once you actually start working on that one piece of paper, or
like no, like that includes like my research time and kind of drawing outside and stuff. But But yeah, so like once I get it to this point when I kind of know what the layout's going to be, and and doing all the drawing and all that, that's probably like a 40-hour process though.
Yeah.
Once I get to this point, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think like your process shots that you sort of just went through are reminding me of our prompts that you're helping the museum with. So one of the other great things that maybe I'll stop sharing for a second. One of the great things that Megan's helping us with, and other artists from the show, The Art of Nature, are helping us out with are these prompts so that people from home can also learn to hone their skills with science illustration, and also just making observations in nature. And so we have one up from Megan so far, and it's about sequential observations. And so I encourage anyone watching to go to the museum's website, and I'll add some links to the video at the end of this. And go through the really simple steps there that Megan's laid out. But then maybe also, do you have any other tips or prompts that you'd like to share with people to get their creative juices flowing and get started?
Yeah, one of my favorites is to find something that you don't know, like what the organism is, right? Like it's a plant, it's a bird, it's a insect, whatever, and do really detailed observations. If you can draw, if you feel like you can even do like a general drawing or a sketch or whatever, do some drawing, make some notes, make note of the date and the time and the location, and is there a microhabitat, and if it's a plant, is it growing in a sunny place or a shady place? Is it growing on a slope, or is it growing sand? Like, where is it? And so just really making a lot, and like all of your senses, although I'd be careful about touching and tasting things, of course. But, use all your senses, make notes of all of those things. Is something, does it have, if it's a plant or something, is it fuzzy? Is it spiny? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? Those kinds of things. And, note all of those things, make notes about all of that, and then see if you can identify it based on the observations you've made. And if you can't, that's okay, because you'll learn like, oh, I didn't look at the underside of the leaf, or I didn't look at how many legs that thing had, or I didn't notice how long the antennae were, or whatever, right? I didn't notice the color, the pattern on the wing. So I think that's a fun way to kind of engage with something that's is even in your yard, like even if it's a weed, like who knows, maybe you think it's a weed and maybe it's something else, maybe it's something really interesting, or it's something that you wouldn't expect. So I like that one. That one's really fun. I've done that a few times, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I find a lot of the times when because I'm not much of a visual artist, I like to doodle, but I find that a lot of the time when I do, I'll stop looking at what the subject is, and I'll just find that like for the past 10 minutes I've just been looking down primarily, and then I look at the thing, I'm like, that's not what it looks like at all. Like, that's
right, and that's fine, right? That's how you kind of learn, like, oh, I need to look at it, I really need to look at it, and how does the leaf attach to the stem, and how are the veins arranged in that leaf? Like those are critical. Sometimes.
And then you'll get to know that subject so well. Like you'll feel so close to it after that.
Yeah, there's very few things that I've illustrated that I can't identify now, right? Like I know how to identify those things because I've drawn them, so I know what they look like.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and also like during this time, if we're all spending so much time, at home, this is a great opportunity for us to get to know our homes too. So you can use this prompt, the sequential observation, which I loved what you said in your write-up about why to do sequential observations, that like you are in one spot day after day after day.
Right. Yeah. And I'm doing that right now. Like I sit, I'm working, so I have my, I'm doing my work, and I have a sketchbook and a journal next to me, and I'm making daily observations about the birds that I can see who are now building nests like outside of the window of my office. Right. And I can see probably 3 locations of nests like just from my window. from one window in my house, you know? So yeah, it's amazing. Even, and I would have never seen that. I mean, I've always kind of known like, oh, there's birds nesting around, but I've never been able to see the whole process. And I'm going to be able to probably see a fair bit of it this year, which is so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel too, like I've been noticing things around where I live a lot more than I normally do. Like, I think a lot of times, like, we want to go take the picture of or draw the thing that's like something new and different and other. But yeah, I think that this has been so so great to get inspiration from you, and to you know, feel like we can look at the world through the lens of science and through the lens of art too. And so thank you for spending your time with us today. I want to make sure that there's nothing else. There's some thank yous. There's a lot of thank yous.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here.
And there was one question early on that I'll just bring back, which is about what parts of your science brain enhance your art, and then what parts of your art brain make you better at science?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the parts of my science brain that make me good at art are being, you know, kind of paying attention to detail, right? I mean, that's what I like to bring out in the artwork that I'm doing. And so that attention to detail, and the interest, I think my interest and curiosity about the world, about understanding how, you know, creatures or organisms are kind of placed in their ecosystem, really kind of is the basis for a lot of the work that I'm doing right now. So I think that is really helpful to have an interest, right, in the things that I'm drawing. So yeah, I think that attention to detail and that kind of curiosity, and, you know, and being like analytical, right? Like when I'm drawing something, especially if I'm, you know, really focused on accuracy, I have to be able to kind of analyze what I'm looking at and understand the importance of, you know, various kind of features, right? I can't just make things up. As much as sometimes that would make my life a lot easier, I can't do that because I'll get busted, you know. I get busted for that.
You ever do things where you can say like, oh no, this is not science illustration, this is something else entirely?
So I'm like, oh, that's an art piece.
Yeah,
don't worry about it. Yeah, so I'm always kind of like, I'm kind of dancing that line a lot. And in terms of the art part of my brain, I think being able to kind of think outside the box and be creative and kind of play a little bit, you know, like I mean, one of the reasons I like to show people like my sketchbooks, and like, I'm not shy about laying out my sketchbooks. Not everything I do is beautiful. Some things I hate. I don't care, because I think that's really part of the process. And I want to show people that, like, it's not magic, right? I'm not creating magic. I'm playing and I'm kind of messing with things, but I don't just like these finished pieces don't just like emerge, you know. Like, it's a process. I'm building and I'm playing and I'm messing around, and I have to be willing to kind of scrap things and start over and keep asking questions. And I don't necessarily think of my brain as like in two different pieces. I think there's kind of a constant back and forth between both of those parts of my brain. And I think, you know, thinking outside the box is also a feature of a really good scientist, right? Is to kind of look at something in a different way or think about something in a different way. So I think there's a lot of kind of back and forth, and I think that's just kind of the way my brain has developed over time, you know, that I do all of those things kind of as just part of my process. And that's, you know, why I think that's why science illustration is so comfortable for me, because it feels like totally, it's just like such an embodiment of all of the things that I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, and thank you for saying that you don't just make a perfect finished product like that. because it can be intimidating looking at really which I mean, and a lot of us don't have that skill set, and so that's why we love to look at artwork by people who do. And so again, I encourage people to go to the museum's website and look at not just Megan's work, but we have over 30 artists, I think, this year, and like around 60 different pieces, and lots of different styles, lots of different subject matters. There's a lot of different ways to get inspired there. And yeah, I like what you said about, you got to work at it, but also that, it's, even if you don't want it to be a beautiful product at the end for people who are watching, maybe who aren't science illustrators, it's still useful. And it's allowing you, like you said, this opportunity to get to know these natural elements around you, and you know them really well now because you spent so much time with them. So I think that's maybe like a good place to leave it, with some inspiration for those watching. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you. So do you want to share where people can find your work?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell you, and then if I can really get this up quickly, I'll show you. So I, of course, have a website like everyone, and it's just my name, MeganGnekow.com. And if my Google will do what I am asking it to do, it'll come up here in just a second. Yeah, that's one good place to find me. A lot of my work is on my website. Which is refusing to load. Delightful. But also I have an Instagram account, which is public. And so you can follow me on Instagram. It's also just my name, my first name with an underscore, then my last name. Those are probably the two best ways. Of course, I have an Etsy site. And so, you can see, some of my work, original work and reproductions and stuff are all, there for sale, of course. And then there's local, oh, thank you, there it is. And then there's local, eventually, when we can all go back to our being engaged in our community, the museum sells my artwork. There's a couple of retail outlets in Santa Cruz, at the Tannery, at Flora and Fauna there, and at Homework, which is in Midtown Santa Cruz, and a few other places. And there's a list on my website of the retail places that have my work. And eventually I'll also have some exhibits coming up. I'm not totally sure how that's all is gonna look this year, but yeah. So that'll be also an option. And yeah, those are all probably the best places to find me. Oh, right. And yeah, Instagram is, and I post kind of all kinds of stuff. I do post a lot of sketches because I like, sharing the process and stuff with folks, and but also just like pictures of my adventures and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of these recent ones are kind of my daily reports from shelter in place.
Yeah, I've been loving that. I think, and that's, I want to be better at that, making daily recordings of this time, because it is a unique time. And so I really, I've been inspired by watching along with you doing this.
Thank you. Thanks.
And yeah, you can make, we stumble upon so many things in our everyday. No matter where you live, there is something living around you, and there is something interesting to see and to notice. So just thanks again so much for joining us, and thank you all out there for watching, and thanks for sharing your questions with us. We are going to be doing more live programming throughout the coming weeks and months, and if you have ideas for things that you would like for us to do, let us know. Send us a message right on here. Yeah, we want to connect with you during this time. So whatever way that we can best support you and bring you really interesting moments while you're at home, we want to do that. So thanks again. Visit the website, and I'm going to sign off now. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Marisa, for making this happen. And thanks to the museum for hosting and for all of your support. It's just, it's such an incredible part of our community. So I really appreciate your support.
Thanks, Megan.
Yeah.